Do you know what Christian nationalism is and how it got started? I'm going to take a few moments and share some of my research. There is an article by a Rutgers University professor, Joseph Williams, and in his article, Christian Nationalism Explained, an interview with Rutgers professor Joseph Williams, he provides the following definition. Christian nationalists insist that the United States was established as an explicitly Christian nation, and they believe that this close relationship between Christianity and the state needs to be protected and in many respects restored in order for the United States to fulfill its God-given destiny. Recent scholarship underscores the extent to which these efforts to secure a privileged position for Christianity in the public square often coincide with efforts to preserve the historical status quo on issues of race, gender, and sexuality. And the practical ramifications of such views involve everything from support for laws that codify specific interpretations of Christian morality to the defense of religious displays on public property to nativist reactions to non-white, non-Christian immigrants. So Professor John Williams teaches a course at Rutgers along with Professor Tia Kolbaba called Religions Now, 21st Century Controversies. And in this course, he has come up with a series of questions that they discuss with students throughout the semester. And he states in this article, for a topic like Christian nationalism, there are a number of questions that we will discuss with students and encourage them to consider. What factors in recent U.S. history contribute to the growing prevalence of Christian nationalism in the national discourse? Who is drawn to Christian nationalism and why? What is the precise relationship between the explicitly religious elements of Christian nationalism and the overlapping ideologies of race, gender, and sexuality that it intersects with? Why do sound bites in the news frequently get wrong regarding the movement? Finally, we also introduce them to intersections of nationalism and religion in other parts of the world, encouraging them to think comparatively about how religious identities are related to ethnic and national identities in Turkey, India, and Hungary. In short, in the signature course, we're constantly looking for ways to provide students with the tools they need to critically assess religion's role in contemporary controversies. So one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast about Christian nationalism is that I grew up in Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, as in most of the United States, we are having what they call midterm elections. So I live in North America, specifically I live in Florida. And so for listeners throughout other parts of the world who may not be familiar with what the midterms are and what they mean in the United States, I would suggest that you Google it. But in fact, a person who is running for the governor of Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, he is an avowed Christian nationalist, and I thought it was important that I take some time and try to share some perspectives about what that means, because in today's political climate, we do in fact have quite a few people who identify as Christian nationalists. And I think it's important that we know exactly what that means. So, in yet another article entitled Our Moral Pandemic, Christian Nationalism and Political Idolatry, written by Drew J. Strait. And in this particular article, John Drew Strait, who has a PhD and is the assistant professor of New Testament and Christian origins at AMBS, which stands for Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary, put forth the following working definition of Christian nationalism. So what he says about Christian nationalism, he says, in quotes, Christian nationalism, in short, is a worldview where one's theological imagination is co-opted by state power. It exchanges the church's loyalty to the Lord of Peace for a false god fashioned by the myth of American exceptionalism. In fact, Christian nationalism is a form of political idolatry that distorts our knowledge of God and neighbor through a xenophobic, racialized, and militarized gospel that is at odds with the life and teachings of Jesus. So in this article, which I'm referencing, again called Our Moral Pandemic, Christian Nationalism and Political Idolatry, which was written on May 9, 2022, he outlines 3 steps for what Christians against white Christian nationalism can do. And he says, step 1, break the silence. And he says the first thing Christians against Christian nationalism can do is to break silence and create spaces to define and talk about white Christian nationalism. It is impossible to resist something unless you can name the objects of your resistance, which that makes perfect sense to me. Step 2, define Christian nationalism. He says, however, but how should we define Christian nationalism? And so, as I previously stated, he says, Christian nationalism, in short, is a worldview where one's theological imagination is co-opted by state power. The problem with Christian nationalism is not that it is racial and ethnic. The problem, rather, is that it is supremacist and ethnocentric. It exchanges the church's loyalty to the Lord of Peace and citizenship in God's multiracial and unarmed kingdom for a false god fashioned by the myth of American exceptionalism. And again, as I previously said, he says that Christian nationalism, therefore, is a form of political idolatry, and that it distorts our knowledge of God and neighbor through a xenophobic, nativist, and violent gospel of, quote, us, white English-speaking Christians, versus them, everybody else. In other words, Christian nationalism is a worldview in which one's ethno-racial identity becomes a more powerful, controlling narrative than one's baptismal identity, quote, in Christ. Step 3, preach the whole life of Jesus. And basically what he means here is that in following the whole life of Jesus from womb to empty tomb, Christ's followers become active participants in God's work of renewal and reconciliation by proclaiming peace through Jesus Christ. and he references Acts chapter 10, verse 36. He says, can we do the same by building a church-led social movement of anti-oppression, Jesus-following Christians who collectively bear witness to the myriad ways in which white Christian nationalism is incompatible with the way of Jesus? And that's why he says to preach the whole life of Jesus. In preaching the whole life of Jesus, we are invited to not reduce the gospel to a myopic message of personal salvation separate from God's cosmic purposes of reconciling humans to God and humans to one another. In preaching the whole life of Jesus, we are invited to incarnate and become active participants in the ways of Jesus in our world today, including the ways that neighborly love, inclusive table fellowship, divestment of money, and care for the poor interrupt patterns of oppression and sin in our world. So, with that said, and if this sounds like a lot of Christian ideology, at some level it is. But it's important because we're now going to hone in on an individual who I guess is responsible for the emergence of Christian nationalism, and that would be William Dutch Sheets. So, William Dutch Sheets is one of America's most influential Christian voices, demanding an end to the separation of church and state. He is the leading figure in a fundamentalist movement known as the New Apostolic Reformation, whose followers believe America is anointed by God. They seek to live in a country where their biblical views are not just protected, but imposed on others as a matter of law. So there was a Rolling Stone article dated September 1, 2022, Meet the Apostle of Right-Wing Christian Nationalism by Tim Dickinson. And so in this article, there is mention of a manifesto, which is called the Watchman's Decree. And I am going to share some of the, well, actually, I'm going to read what the Watchman's Decree says, and then we're going to circle back around and share a little bit more information about Dutchman Sheets. So, Watchman Decree kind of reads like, I don't know, it's not like a Pledge of Allegiance, but I guess for those who are followers, it's a very good description of what they believe in. So I will share it. The Watchman Decree. As a patriot of faith, I attest my allegiance first and foremost to the kingdom of God and the Great Commission. Secondly, I agree to be a watchman over our nation concerning its people and their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whereas We, the church, are God's governing body on the earth. We have been given legal power from heaven and now exercise our authority. We are God's ambassadors and spokespeople over the earth. Through the power of God, we are the world's influencers. Because of our covenant with God, we are equipped and delegated by Him to destroy every attempted advance of the enemy. We make our declarations. 1. We decree that America's executive branch of government will honor God and defend the Constitution. 2. We decree that our legislative branch, Congress, will write only laws that are righteous and constitutional. 3. We decree that our judicial system will issue rulings that are biblical and constitutional. 4. We declare that we stand against wokeness, the occult, and every evil attempt against our nation. 5. We declare and we now take back our God-given freedoms according to our Constitution. 6. We declare that we take back influence at the local level in our communities. 7. We decree that we take back and permanently control positions of influence and leadership in each of the 7 mountains. And so there is an asterisk by 7 mountains, and 7 mountains of influence include media, business, finance, family, education, politics, arts/entertainment, and religion. 8. We decree that the blood of Jesus covers and protects our nation. It protects and separates us for God. 9. We declare that our nation is energy independent. 10. We declare that America is strong spiritually, financially, militarily, and technologically. 11. We decree that we decree that evil carries no power, authority, or rights in our land nor over our people. 12. We decree that we will operate in unity, going beyond denominational lines in order to accomplish the purposes of God for our nation. And we decree that, all caps, America shall be saved! We know this country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. We know the truth. Therefore, we stand for truth and will never, in all caps, be deceived. We will never, in all caps, stop fighting. We will, in all caps, never, ever, ever, lowercase, give up or give in. We will, all caps, take our country back. We will, all caps, honor, all caps, one true God, lowercase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all caps, America shall be saved. Working together with Him, we strongly urge you not to receive God's grace in vain by turning away from sound doctrine and His merciful kindness. For He says, at the acceptable time, in parentheses, the time of grace, I listened to you and I helped you on the day of salvation. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. And this is quoted from 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. So, as you can see, this is quite a lot to digest. And again, Dutch Sheet Ministries is a 501c3 approved nonprofit ministry. And so I would say to you, if you're interested, you should certainly go to dutchsheets.org, where you can obtain more information about his ministry. And it says that if you go to that website, Dutch Sheets is an internationally recognized author and founder of Dutch Sheets Ministries, and give him 15. Having been in ministry for over 45 years, Dutch has pastored, taught in Bible colleges, and preached in many nations. He has written 23 books, some of which have been translated into over 30 languages. His international bestseller, Intercessory Prayer, has sold over 1 million copies worldwide. Dutch is a messenger of hope for America, boldly proclaiming that she will experience a third great awakening and turn back to her God-given destiny. He labors to equip the church in governmental intercession, challenging believers to passionate prayer for worldwide revival. It says he treasures time spent with his family and grandchildren. He said Dutch and Cece, his wife of 40 plus years, enjoy quiet walks in the woods, reading, fishing, and an occasional walk on the beach. They make their home in beautiful South Carolina. Our mission, and I quote, Dutch Sheets Ministry is an apostolic, prophetic, and teaching ministry that is used to empower Christians throughout America and the world. Dutch is known for his apostolic and prophetic anointing and gifted teaching, cutting through challenging beliefs, bringing revelation and alignment to many believers. He is also a gifted writer, using this method of communication to teach different topics, primarily on prayer and spiritual authority. Dutch Sheet Ministry strives to give hope to the hopeless and provide solid teaching tools so that believers can move forward, growing in their personal relationship with Jesus, as well as leading Bible studies, congregations, Bible classes, and other leadership groups. We do this through our CD/DVD teachings, books, written teachings, digital app, live seminars, and speaking engagements. We desire to teach the Christian believer to be strong in their faith and also equip them to teach others. At Dutch Sheets Ministries, our primary desire is to empower believers for a third great awakening. Again, a lot to digest. So, for those who do not know, Christian nationalism has long been an undercurrent of Republican politics, which is sort of kind of how we find ourselves where we are in the United States, with a lot of extreme thought, behavior. For those of you all that are aware, the recent insurrection which occurred at the U.S. Capitol all has its origins to some degree in Christian nationalism, which is why this is an apropos topic. So bear with me. I am trying to find another article which sheds some light on Dutch Sheets. So he says that the new Republican fringe is done with separation of church and state. And as we know, that principle is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. So you can draw your own conclusions about what it means if someone is stating that they're trying to tear down the separation of church and state. What it means to me is it is the attempt of a small minority, although it would appear that they are becoming, their numbers are becoming greater, to impose their minority point of view upon the upon the majority as well. They apparently do not believe in America or the United States as we view America and the United States, which is a multicultural melting pot of different cultures, because they seem to preach that the only way is their way, and it seems to encompass white Europeans and doesn't seem to leave room for anyone else in their worldview. So again, Tim Dickinson is a reporter with the Rolling Stone magazine, and he wrote an article about sheets, which I would highly recommend. And that article is called Meet the Apostle of Right-Wing Christian Nationalism. It was written on September 1, 2022. So Tim Dickinson has also written an article, interestingly enough, about Doug Mastriano, who is indeed, as I previously stated, running for the governor of the state of Pennsylvania. And so in an article dated September 29th, 2022, Tim Dickinson has an article. He has a 7-point plan for a Christian takeover and wants Doug Mastriani to lead the charge. So there is a quote underneath that article, or the title of the article, that says, "Jesus was promised nations for his inheritance," says Lance Wallnau, a self-described Christian nationalist prophet, not just churches. So, regrettably, there are others in our political purview or in the news front and center, who subscribe to this same philosophy. Marjorie Taylor Greene is another individual who subscribes to Christian nationalism. I believe the founding member or person of this movement was C. Peter Wagner, who died in 2016. So C. Peter Wagner was like the leading figure in the movement, which was known as the New Apostolic Reformation. And so essentially, this was a charismatic Christian movement that seeks to take dominion over politics, business, and culture in preparation for the end times and Jesus' return. The leaders are considered apostles and prophets gifted by God for this role. So apparently C. Peter Wagner describes himself as the first person who noticed the movement, gave a name to it, and started writing books about it. So until he retired, which was prior to his death, he was the president of Global Harvest Ministries as well. For 30 years, he was a professor at Fuller Theological Seminary School of World Ministries. So there are all these wild and bizarre stories affiliated with the New Apostolic Reformation movement. So I'm not necessarily going to share the bizarre stories, but if you Google C. Peter Wagner, you will find some of these outlandish theories that he believed in. So regrettably, some of what they believe is that the Democratic Party is a demon structure. I mean, I can't make this stuff up. And so basically, they believe that people in American politics are possessed by demons. I mean, I cannot, other than to tell you, you should Google him and what he believes, and to know how their thought and their way of thinking, all of these movements and all these thoughts are coming together and explain how we are where we are in the United States and why people believe what they believe. I'm not going to give them dignify some of their beliefs by sharing them, but again, I would certainly say Google, do your research. Christian nationalism is not just a movement that is confined to North America, the United States, as a political ideology. I believe, some forms of this way of thinking and being exist throughout the world. So there are numerous resources that one can go to that will share their definition on what Christian nationalism means. I am looking, or I'm referencing the website Christianity Today International in an article written by Paul D. Miller on February 3rd, 2021. What is Christian nationalism? And so in this article, he says, what is Christian nationalism and how is it different from Christianity? How is it different from patriotism? How should Christians think about nations, especially about the United States? If nationalism is bad, does that mean we should reject nationality and national loyalty altogether? And so he defines patriotism as love of country. I have no problem with that. He says, what is nationalism? There are many definitions of nationalism and an active debate about how best to define it. He says, I reviewed the standard academic literature on nationalism and found several recurring themes. Most scholars agree that nationalism starts with the belief that humanity is divisible into mutually distinct, internally coherent cultural groups defined by shared traits like language, religion, ethnicity, or culture. From there, scholars say nationalists believe that these groups should each have their own governments, that governments should promote and protect a nation's cultural identity, and that sovereign national groups provide meaning and purpose for human beings. So then he defines Christian nationalism as follows. Christian nationalism is the belief that the American nation is defined by Christianity and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way. Popularly, Christian nationalists assert that America is and must remain, in quotes, a Christian nation, not merely as an observation about American history, but as a prescriptive program for what America must continue to be in the future. Scholars like Samuel Huntington have made a similar argument that America is defined by its, quote, Anglo-Protestant past, and that we will lose our identity and our freedom if we do not preserve our cultural inheritance. Now, people, I don't have to tell you what that sounds like to me, but you make your own judgment. Christian nationalists do not reject the First Amendment and do not advocate for theocracy, but they do believe that Christianity should enjoy a privileged position in the public square. The term Christian nationalism is relatively new, and its advocates generally do not use it of themselves, but it accurately describes American nationalists who believe American identities is inextricably from Christianity. Now, people, We know that the United States is a multicultural melting pot of people from all over the world, from different religious backgrounds. So as you see, there's great tension between these two beliefs, and or this way of thinking. So, this feeds into our past in the sense that some of this reliance upon, quote, Christianity, nationalism, belief in various things is kind of sort of what was used to support slavery and segregation, quite frankly. So it wouldn't be unfair for me to say that for a lot of Christian nationalists and or for white supremacists, that indeed their ideal America was one in which people of color did not have freedoms that we currently have, and obviously was one in which white males were in power. Indeed, at the time the U.S. Constitution was created, the only people who could vote were white men who owned property. It would be a pity if a minority of people believe that's where we need to go back. And so it appears that based on recent rulings in the U.S. Supreme Court and other things, that indeed we may be heading in that direction if people don't educate themselves, if they don't take the time to do research, and become familiar with some of these different groups, their ideology. So one last thought. What do Christian nationalists want that is different from normal Christian engagement in politics? This is all in the article I've referenced. So it says, Christian nationalists want to define America as a Christian nation, and they want the government to promote a specific cultural template as the official culture of the country. Some have advocated for an amendment to the Constitution to recognize America's Christian heritage, others to reinstitute prayer in public schools. Some work to enshrine a Christian nationalist interpretation of American history in school curricula, including that America has a special relationship with God or has been, in quotes, chosen by Him to carry out a special mission on earth. Others advocate for immigration restrictions, specifically to prevent a change to American religious and ethnic demographics or a change to American culture. Some want to empower the government to take stronger action to circumscribe immoral behavior. Boy, is that a podcast? I mean, immoral behavior. Let's not even talk about that, because how many, quote, Christians engage in immoral behavior? Some, again, like the scholar Samuel Huntington, have argued that the United States government must defend and enshrine its predominant, quote, Anglo-Protestant culture to ensure the survival of American democracy. And sometimes Christian nationalism is most evident not in its political agenda, but in the sort of attitude with which it is held, an unstated presumption that Christians are entitled to primacy of place in the public square because they are heirs of the true or essential heritage of American culture, that Christians have a presumptive right to define the meaning of the American experiment because they see themselves as America's architects, first citizens, and guardians. It says, Christian nationalists tends to treat other Americans as second-class citizens. If it were fully implemented, it would not respect the full religious liberty of all Americans, empowering the state through, quote, morals legislation, and we see that happening, to regulate conduct always carries the risk of overreaching, setting a bad precedent and creating government powers that could be used later to be used against Christians. Additionally, Christian nationalism is an ideology held overwhelmingly by white Americans, and it thus tends to exacerbate racial and ethnic cleavages. In recent years, the movement has grown increasingly characterized by fear and by a belief that Christians are victims of persecution. FYI, the Supreme Court is now hearing oral arguments in a line of cases to do away with affirmative action. If you don't know what affirmative action is or the history of affirmative action, please Google and educate yourself about what that line of jurisprudence and cases have meant in the United States. Some are beginning to argue that American Christians need to prepare to fight physically to preserve America's identity, an argument that played into the January 6th riot. So it would appear that we are now at the point in America where a segment of the population believing that they are empowered by God to retain their way of being and thinking and living are prepared to take up arms against everybody else that doesn't believe what they believe, namely that there should be a separation of church and state, and that principle is indeed enshrined within the U.S. Constitution. So the last thing this article says, and I'm reading all of this from the article, how is Christian nationalism dangerous to the church? Christian nationalism takes the name of Christ for a worldly political agenda, proclaiming that its program is the political program for every true believer. That is wrong in principle, no matter what the agenda is, because only the church is authorized to proclaim in the name of Jesus and carry his standard into the world. It is even worse with a political movement that champions some causes that are unjust, which is the case with Christian nationalism and its attendant illiberalism. In that case, Christian nationalism is calling evil good and good evil. It is taking the name of Christ as a fig leaf to cover its political program, treating the message of Jesus as a tool of political propaganda and the church as the handmaiden and cheerleader of the state. So in sum, it says, how is Christianity different from Christian nationalism? It says, and I quote, Christianity is a religion focused on the person and work of Jesus Christ, as defined by the Christian Bible and the apostles and Nicene creeds. It is the gathering of people, quote, from every nation and tribe and people and language who worship Jesus. Revelations 7, chapter 7, verse 9. A faith that unites Jews and Greeks, Americans and non-Americans together. Christianity is political in the sense that its adherents have always understood their faith to challenge, affect, and transcend their worldly loyalties, but there is no single view on what political implications flow from Christian faith other than that we should, quote, fear God, honor the king, pay our taxes, love our neighbors, and seek justice. Christian nationalism is, by contrast, a political ideology focused on the national identity of the United States. It includes a specific understanding of American history and American government that are obviously extra-biblical, an understanding that is contested by many historians and political scientists. Most importantly, Christian nationalism includes specific policy prescriptions that it claims are biblical, but are at best extrapolations from biblical principles and at worst contradictory to them. So, I have no answers. I merely leave you with the thought that you should do research and educate yourself about this growing movement, how it ties into white supremacy, why it is that the Republican Party has knowingly, willingly embraced this ideology along with the Proud Boys and all these other groups which are racist. Please, people, take the time to Google some of the names I've mentioned in this podcast. Google Christian nationalism, white supremacy, and most importantly, as we are less than 7 days out from the midterm elections, it is so important that we turn out to vote, not just when we're voting for the president of the United States, but this is why it is important that we vote at the local level, because it all starts in our communities. We have a voice in terms of the people that we elect. And if the people that are elected are not following the will and doing the bidding of the people, then in our system, we can use our individual and collective voices to vote them out of office and put people in place that will indeed follow the voice and heed the voices of the people who have elected them. We have such a disconnect between people who are elected, lobbyists who support them, and we need to get back to the basics. After all, indeed, we were founded, and the preamble to the U.S. Constitution starts by saying, "We the people." So indeed, we the people individually and collectively have the power to affect change. And in closing, be the change you want to see. Thank you for listening.